I came to the restaurant with a folder of documents, but when I saw them together, it made me sick. He was holding her hand, they were laughing until the waiter brought the check. And then, without blinking an eye, he paid it, with my card. I used to believe that trust was the foundation of all relationships. That's what my father taught me, and that's what I preached to anyone who would listen. When you trust someone with your life, you don't think to check bank statements. You don't imagine they'd stab you in the back. Brian was my best friend since college. We'd pulled all-nighters together, celebrated victories, mourned losses. We built our marketing firm from nothing but student loans and endless cups of coffee. And Laura, my wife of 7 years, the woman I planned to grow old with, to have children with someday. Now they sat before me in our favorite restaurant, completely unaware that I knew everything. It started with small discrepancies. A missing $200 here, an unexplained charge there. Nothing dramatic enough to raise immediate alarms. Did you buy something? I'd ask Laura over breakfast, scanning my phone's banking app. Just some stuff for the house, she'd say with that smile I once found so reassuring. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She had access to all my accounts, we were partners in every sense of the word. Or so I thought. The first real warning came when I overheard Brian on the phone in his office. His door was partially open, and his voice carried that excited tone he only got when closing big deals. "We'll move forward next week then," he was saying. "Yes, the Parker account. Don't worry, Mark knows nothing about it." I stood frozen outside his door. The Parker account? One of our biggest potential clients, and I hadn't heard a word about it. When I confronted Brian, his explanation seemed reasonable enough. Just exploring options, man. Didn't want to get your hopes up until it was solid. He clapped my shoulder with that easy familiarity of 15 years of friendship. "We're partners. What's good for me is good for you, right?" I nodded and smiled, but something felt off. That night, I couldn't sleep. Laura noticed my restlessness. "Work stuff?" she asked, rubbing my back in slow circles. "Yeah," I said. "Just some confusion with Brian about a client." She tensed slightly. So slightly I might have imagined it. But looking back, that was the moment, the exact moment when my subconscious registered that something was wrong. The next day, I called our accountant under the pretense of tax planning. "Can you send me the last 6 months of transactions for all accounts?" I asked casually. "Laura wants to review our spending habits." What I found turned my stomach. Regular withdrawals to accounts I didn't recognize. Transactions at high-end restaurants on days when Laura claimed to be having lunch with her sister. Hotel charges in the city where we lived. And more disturbing, documents had been filed to restructure ownership percentages in our company, giving Brian controlling interest. I didn't confront them immediately. Something inside me, pride, perhaps, or a desperate need to understand the full scope of their betrayal, held me back. Instead, I installed a keylogger on the office computer. I placed a small recording device in my home office where Laura often made calls when I wasn't around. 2 agonizing weeks passed as I collected evidence, each new discovery more devastating than the last. They weren't just having an affair. They were systematically dismantling everything I'd built. They had opened joint accounts. Brian had convinced several clients to work exclusively with him, citing my personal problems as reason for concern. Laura had begun moving our personal assets, preparing for what I now understood was their endgame, pushing me out completely. In one recording, Laura's voice was crystal clear. "How much longer do we have to keep pretending? I'm tired of sleeping with him." Brian's response chilled me. "Just a few more weeks. The paperwork's almost done. Once we have control of the company, we can drop the act. He trusts you completely, he'll never see it coming." I sat alone in my dark office, their voices surrounding me, feeling something inside me break. And then, curiously, something else formed in its place. A clarity I'd never experienced before. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of my rage or my breakdown. I would beat them at their own game. I contacted Melissa, a corporate attorney who had helped us establish the company years ago. Brian had always disliked her, preferring to work with his college roommate for legal matters, which now made perfect sense. I need to protect myself, I told her, laying out what I'd discovered without emotional embellishment. And I need to do it quietly. Over the next 10 days, we worked methodically. I transferred personal funds to new accounts. I reached out to key clients individually, securing their loyalty with truth and transparency. I documented every instance of financial misconduct. And most importantly, I leveraged a clause in our original partnership agreement that Brian had clearly forgotten: any partner found to be acting against company interests could be removed by unanimous vote of the remaining partners and advisory board. I called a confidential meeting with our 3-person advisory board, individuals who had mentored us since the beginning. They were shocked but ultimately supportive when presented with evidence. The vote was scheduled, the paperwork prepared. All that remained was the confrontation. I wanted to see their faces when they realized their plan had failed. I chose Antonio's, the upscale Italian restaurant where Laura and I had celebrated every anniversary, where I had proposed on bended knee beside a violin player 7 years ago. Now it would be the setting for an entirely different kind of proposal. I watched from my car as they arrived separately but within minutes of each other, their standard procedure to avoid suspicion. Laura looked beautiful in a black dress I had never seen. Brian wore the confident smile of a man who believed victory was within reach. Through the window, I watched them laugh, touch hands across the table, share wine from the same glass. Every gesture was a fresh wound, but I stayed focused on what needed to be done. I waited until they had finished their meal, until the waiter brought their check. Brian reached for his wallet. No, my wallet. He had stolen one of my credit cards months ago, I'd discovered. Even now, they were spending my money to finance their betrayal. The moment he handed the card to the waiter, I grabbed my folder and walked in. Their table was in the back corner, our favorite spot because of its privacy. How thoughtful of them to choose it tonight. Laura saw me first. Her smile vanished, replaced by a careful neutrality that must have served her well during months of deception. "Mark. What are you doing here?" Her voice was perfectly calibrated, surprised but not alarmed. Brian recovered quickly. "Hey, buddy. Great minds think alike, huh? We were just discussing the Reynolds proposal. Thought a change of scenery might spark some ideas." I sat down without being invited, placed my folder on the table, and smiled. "That's interesting, Brian, since we lost the Reynolds account last month. Which you would know if you'd been to any of the status meetings." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Well, I meant." "I know what you meant," I said, still smiling. "I know everything." Laura's hand moved to cover Brian's on the table. "Not hiding their connection anymore, interesting." "Mark, you're not making sense," she said. "Are you feeling okay?" I ignored her and opened the folder, removing a stack of documents. "Let's get right to it. Brian, as of 4:30 this afternoon, you've been voted out of the company. Your access cards have been deactivated, your email has been suspended, and security has already packed up your office." His face drained of color. "You can't do that. That's not legal." "Oh, but it is. Section 12, Paragraph 3 of our partnership agreement. Any partner engaged in activities detrimental to company interests may be removed by unanimous vote of remaining partners and advisory board." We voted. "You're out." I turned to Laura, who was now gripping the edge of the table. "As for you, Laura, I've filed for divorce. Given the evidence I've collected of your affair and financial manipulation, my attorney assures me it will be fairly straightforward." "Evidence," she whispered. I removed my phone, played a brief clip of their voices discussing their plans for me, then turned it off again. I have hours of this. From the office, from our home, from your secret meetings. Quite thorough planning on your part. Almost admirable, really. Brian found his voice, anger replacing shock. You recorded us? That's illegal. In some states, yes. Not in this one. One-party consent is all that's required, and I consented. I looked at the waiter approaching with Brian's, my, credit card. Oh, and that card you just used? It's been reported stolen. Which it was, by you. The waiter hesitated beside our table, sensing the tension. Is everything all right with the payment, sir? Brian stared at me, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. There seems to be a problem, I told the waiter. He'll need to use a different card. Laura's composure finally broke. Mark, please, we can talk about this. You're angry, I understand, but... I'm not angry, I said, surprised to find it was true. I'm disappointed. And I'm done. I stood up, leaving the documents on the table. The company now belongs to a holding corporation controlled by me. The house, which was purchased with company funds through that shell corporation you created, nice touch, by the way, remains company property. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. Brian stood up suddenly, his chair screeching against the floor. You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I made that company what it is. Several diners turned to look at us. I kept my voice level. What you've made is a series of very poor decisions. The FBI is particularly interested in the wire transfers to those offshore accounts. They'll be contacting you soon. His face went from red to ashen in seconds. You didn't. I did. Turns out, financial fraud across state lines gets federal attention. Who knew? Laura was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Mark, please. I made a mistake. We can work through this. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since entering the restaurant. For a moment, I remembered the woman I thought she was, the life I thought we had. But that was gone now, destroyed by her own choices. Goodbye, Laura. I walked away, leaving them with the unpaid bill, the damning documents, and the ruins of their carefully constructed plan. Outside in the cool evening air, I took my first deep breath in weeks. I had expected to feel triumphant or at least vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. Hollow. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, all done. Yes, I replied. All done. But as I drove away from the restaurant, from my marriage, from the friendship that had defined my adult life, I wondered if anything was ever truly finished. The betrayal would always be part of me now. The trust one had once given so freely would never flow so easily again. I had won, by any objective measure. I had protected myself, safeguarded my business, delivered consequences to those who had wronged me. Yet victory tasted strangely bitter. At a red light, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a man I barely recognized, harder, colder, more calculating than I had ever been. I had survived their betrayal, but I had been transformed by it too. The light turned green, and I drove toward an uncertain future, leaving behind not just two traitors, but also pieces of myself I might never recover. As I merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then, curious, I connected the call through my car's system. Hello, Mark. A woman's voice, vaguely familiar. It's Rachel from the advisory board. Listen, I've been thinking about everything that happened today. If you need someone to talk to, well, I know what it's like to be betrayed by the people closest to you. I hesitated, then made a decision. Actually, I could use some company right now. Sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, justice is just the first step in a longer journey toward healing.